Hello, everybody. My name is Sam Ross, and I'm the International Programme Director of Link Education International, based in Edinburgh. And I'm also a trustee of Scotland's International Development Alliance. And it's kind of in that role that I am speaking to Srabani Sen today. Hello, Srabani. Srabani is the Chief Executive and founder of Full Colour, which is a company that supports organisations bring equity, diversity and inclusion, which is the subject of our chat today, into the centre of who they are and how they work. She has over 30 years of experience as a senior leader and has led a number of boards as well. Srabani noticed that while gaining the career she wanted, she was often the only person of colour in the room. And she overcame unconscious bias to achieve her career goals and was driven to share that learning in combination with her knowledge of successfully running organisations. And that's why she set up Full Colour. Srabani is also co-developer of Bond's Equity, Diversity and Inclusion programme. So that's great. Thank you, Srabani. Before we came online today, I had a look at the Full Colour website, which is really interesting and really useful. And as an organisation that's on our journey to improve our equity, diversity and inclusion across our organisation with Link and with the Alliance in Scotland, it was really interesting to pick out some things that really resonated with me. Two things I really liked were the 10 equity, diversity and inclusion mistakes and how to fix them. Some really easy to understand information, really practical. So I really enjoyed looking at those, and no doubt I'll be sharing them with board members and other leaders across Link. And also the face the facts. So it's a really interesting, it's just 3 pieces of A4. So very short, very easy to digest. And one fact that really jumped out at me was the gender one. And that was when men are involved in gender diversity programs, 96% of respondents report progress, and when they're not, only 30%. It's a really interesting stat there.
Indeed, I'm glad you found them useful. We're big believers in practical and also demystifying. I think one of the things about equity, diversity and inclusion work, and increasingly we're doing quite a lot on anti-racism, is that people get stuck at the theoretical, conceptual level. And one of the things that we try to do at Full Colour is just really demystify things and make things quite practical and actionable. So I'm glad you find those 2 things useful, Sam.
Yeah, no, very much. I enjoyed it. So we're going to chat today about equity, diversity and inclusion in the international development sector. So Srabani, as someone who has had a leadership role for over 30 years, what motivated you to focus on equity, diversity and inclusion over other aspects of leadership development?
Well, I think there's one thing, by the way, I need to correct. I think Bond have done an enormous amount of work on equity, diversity and inclusion and anti-racism. We were involved in a very small way. So we developed with Bond a board development programme for trustees to really equip trustees to know how they can play their role in driving change on those areas. But the reason we decided to focus on EDI is the work we do at Full Colour is far more than develop leaders. That's one aspect of what we do, but what we're about is helping organisations create genuine, deep, systemic change around equity, diversity and inclusion in their own organisations. And what we say to clients is that we will only work with you if you commit that one of the members of the team from the client side that's working with us is in that top level leadership team. And it's not about anything weird like status or any nonsense like that, but for 2 really clear reasons. One is that leaders have the most power in an organization. So if you're serious about driving change, it's really important that leaders are part of shaping how they're going to drive that change. But also on a very practical level, leaders have the biggest overview of what that organization is about, what it's there for, what its strategy is, what its context is within which that organization is working, so they can bring that knowledge to the table. One of our mantras at Full Colour is we might be the experts in equity, diversity and inclusion, but you are the experts in you. And the only way to create genuine change is by bringing those two sets of expertise together. So I think those are the main reasons we work in the way we do. But I set up Full Colour because when I was thinking about wanting to make a contribution to changing the picture around equity, diversity and inclusion, what I realised was there were agencies out there purporting to support leaders in driving change, but none of those agencies were led or had within them people who'd actually led anything. And if you have never experienced what it's like, the complexity of being a leader, forgive me, but there's no way you're going to be able to support a leader to drive change, because you won't understand what the day job of a leader is, whether that's as a board chair, whether that's as a chief executive, whether that's as a senior leadership team member. So what we're able to do as Full Colour is bring a knowledge and expertise around what it takes to lead an organisation and bring that together with ED&I. And I guess timing wise, I mean, you mentioned how long I've been around. It's been quite a while, but there's a fantastic Michelle Obama quote, which I always mangle, but it's something along the lines of, you should always have three women in your life: the woman who's ahead of you, who you're seeking to follow, the woman on the side of you who you're traveling a journey with, and the woman behind you who you're reaching out for and clearing a path to enable them to move forward. And I felt very much that I was at the stage of my career where I could clear that path a little bit and reach out for those people travelling into journey who are a few steps behind. So that's the kind of a full answer of why we set up Full Colour the way we did.
That's great, really interesting, and thank you for creating that path for us. I think something else you said that really resonated with me was this having leaders part of this change process, because they do have that overview of the organization and are able to see what capacity they can mobilize and where the spaces are to mobilize that capacity. And I think that's really important part of that journey. Yes, so thank you very much for that. So our next question. So as Link Education is an INGO based in Edinburgh, we work with partners in Africa. And in relation to the shifting the power narrative that we're hearing a lot about at the moment, which is very exciting, I'm particularly interested in your answer to this next question. So do you think organisations working with overseas partners have specific equity, diversity and inclusion challenges? And if so, what are they and how can we tackle them?
That's a really important question, Sam, and I guess I would answer that in three ways. I think it's absolutely essential for organisations that work with overseas partners to really lean into issues around equity, equality, inclusion and diversity. And the three reasons are power, congruence, and the absolute need to decolonize the way we think, the way we act, the way we work. And if you've been on our website, which you very definitely have, because you were sharing some of the things that we have up there, one of the documents that you might have looked at was a document that we've pulled together of definitions that Full Colour have developed about what the words mean. What does equity mean? What does inclusion mean? Because there's massive amount of misunderstanding about what the basic terms mean. And one of those definitions is our definition of equality. And equality, from a Full Colour perspective, is about evening out how power works. And there is so much power vested in organisations that are in high-income countries, what often is referred to as the global north. And a lot of that power is around money, because a lot of organisations that exist in different parts of the UK, I'm assuming Scotland as well, exist to raise money to fund programs in low and middle income countries, and that money gives you enormous power. And so unless you're taking active steps to even out how power works, then to my mind, this is the personal view, you're very welcome to disagree with me, you're not doing what you're saying on the tin. And that brings me to the second reason, which is congruence. The work that organisations in the international development space are there to do is address issues of inequality. Inequality in all sorts of different ways, depending on the programmatic work that your organisation is involved in. And if you're not addressing inequality within your own organisations, whether that be around ethnicity, whether that be around gender, whether that be around disability, whatever aspect of diversity that you may need to address in your organisation, how can you, with all conscience and with credibility, be campaigning and talking and seeking funding for work which is about addressing inequality overseas? And then the final thing is about decolonisation. We've been talking about decolonisation for quite a while, let me put it that way. And when I engage with organisations, not just in the international development space, but maybe organisations, for example, in the environment sector that work across different countries in the globe, there's lots of emphasis on the importance of decolonisation, but we seem to have got stuck at the level of decolonisation which is about changing the pictures on our website. Some organisations have gone beyond that, but if you refer to Bond, I'm a big fan of the work that Bond has done. Bond talks about 6 levels of decolonisation. Communications is one aspect of those, one of those 6, and imagery is one aspect of those 6 areas of decolonisation. And I'm sure I don't need to tell you what those areas are, but if I do, let me know and I will remind you what they are. So it isn't a choice, as I can see it, for organisations that are members of your international alliance to whether or not to engage with equity, diversity and inclusion. The only question I can see is how. How do you do it, and how do you do it in a way which drives change?
Yeah,
hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, really interesting. I mean, I think the shift, the power in shifting the power, and the power in your 3 responses there is really key. And at Link, we had a big fundraising strategy meeting last week, and how are we going to change the way we operate to ensure that the participants we work with still get the support they need when they need it. And we kept coming back to power and money, and where is the money? And it's very difficult for us to shift the power realistically when the money's still situated in the north. And there needs to be this movement of where the money is and how the money is accessed, so that it can be more equitably accessed and distributed, I think. So it's really important.
I think that's right. I think we can do more than we think we can do, though, because I think a lot of the power sits with the conditions that we attach to the funding that we provide, and who makes choices about which programme solutions are the right programme solutions to fund. And one of the things that is not-for-profit organisations generally, whether you're in the international development space or other arenas, is that constant drive to get trust and statutory funders in particular to give us unrestricted money, because we say to them, we are the people at the coalface. We know how to spend that money. Don't put restrictions on it. Give it to us so that we can put it where it matters most. Don't those lessons apply to us as well? I would argue yes. And I think it's beyond international development. I think there's all sorts of arenas. Poverty is an arena I know best, perhaps, where we still think we know best. Do we? Do we? Maybe we do, maybe we don't. But I think actually asking ourselves those questions, that's what really addresses that power dynamic between the funder and the fundee.
Yeah. And yeah, unrestricted funding is the golden, the answer to everything in my opinion. But, and your thoughts around the congruence is really interesting as well. So we're really struggling to recruit female leaders in Ethiopia in particular. So we work in Malawi, Uganda, Rwanda, and Ethiopia. And we're pretty evenly matched across Malawi, Uganda. Uganda, it's a fully female team, female leader. But Ethiopia, it's very, very difficult because of the structural and social barriers that have been in place for so long. And we're trying to do bits to break those barriers down. We work in girls' education, and a lot of it is around breaking down those social norms. But one small thing we have done is set up a kind of internship program for women only, for females that have gone, I think that they're university leavers, and have given them an opportunity to work across different sectors of our organization, not necessarily in program design, but it could be in finance or it could be in HR, to give them that just a bit of a leg up so that they can then move on to hopefully managerial and then leadership position. So I think there's small things that when it seems so overwhelming, there are small steps that you can take that hopefully at some point will make a change somewhere down the line for somebody. Next question, Srabani. So we've all recognised the importance of safeguarding and have stepped up our game in this area across the sector quite significantly. And you've said that it's important to drive changes on equity, diversity and inclusion that feels psychologically safe. Why is this important?
It's important for a number of reasons. One of the things around, but I think probably the most important reason is emotion. One of the things when we set up Full Colour, I think I had honestly underestimated was the level of emotion amongst the clients that Full Colour would be working alongside. And people often think about the emotion of minoritized groups who might be frustrated because of lack of progress or the barriers that are placed in their way. They might be angry because they've been discriminated against. What we talk about less is the emotion of the people who have the power to create change. And actually, a lot of the emotion that we deal with is the emotion of leaders. Leaders who are paralyzed by fear, and it can be fear of getting it wrong or fear of doing or saying the wrong thing and being blamed. But also there is something about, for some leaders that we come across, not all leaders by any chance, it doesn't really matter to them personally. So some of the emotion you're getting over is resentment. Why are we doing this? For goodness sake, can't we move on? Black Lives Matter was 2 years ago. Surely we've moved on. I've actually had people saying that to me. So if we don't create a way of working that is psychologically safe, we can't surface those thoughts and emotions which might be the genuine blockers to creating change. So psychological safety is really crucial. But the other thing I would say is that a lot of work around equity, diversity and inclusion is, how do we come up with an action plan? Let's think of some tasks. Let's put these tasks in a piece of paper and it looks like an action plan. The actual job around equity, diversity and inclusion is changing mindset and changing behaviour so that you can change organisational culture. And that mindset and behavioral change needs to happen at a personal, individual level. So if you're not creating a space which is feeling genuinely psychologically safe for the full spectrum of people that you're going to be working with in that organization, that will limit the degree to which you can support an organization to move forward. So that's why for us, psychological safety is key. We very much say to clients, we're not here to judge. We're here to help. And there are a lot of EDI agencies out there that do the judgy things and do the finger wagging and you're bad people and you need to do this to sort yourselves out. It doesn't work. It really doesn't work. That psychological safety, therefore, is a really giant key to put in the lock to open that door for change.
Mm-hmm. And as we know, like behavior change is a journey. It's a long process. It's not something you can just tick off. Yeah, I've done that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that really interesting. And which leads us on to our next question quite nicely, actually. So you've just been talking about mindset and behavior change, and you've had, as we've discussed before, over 30 years of experience working as a senior leader. In your extensive experience, what have been the greatest stumbling blocks for organizational change in this area?
So in terms of the stumbling blocks that organizations face, I think you can probably put them under two headings, one being tangible blocks and one being intangible blocks. Some of the tangible blocks are phenomenally basic. So one of the biggest stumbling blocks that we regularly come across, a tangible block, is not having a common understanding of what the words mean. An analogy that I sometimes use is I ask people to think of the colour blue. So I will use the word blue. And those people that might be watching this this discussion, some people, when you say the word blue, navy blue will pop into their head, and someone else it'll be sky blue, and someone else it'll be baby blue, and someone else it'll be turquoise. But I've said the word blue. Everyone understands what blue means, doesn't it? But actually, because therefore we don't have a common understanding of what those terms mean, what I find is people can inadvertently be pulling against each other, even though they genuinely, sincerely want to move forward. But also because their understanding of what those terms mean can be very hazy, any solutions that they develop to move their organisation forward can be not right because they've not actually understand what those words mean. And another really tangible thing that gets in people's way is a lot of people take what I describe as a throw mud at a wall approach to coming up with solutions. So they'll sit there with a group of people, which may or may not include minoritized groups, and they'll do a general sort of brainstorming of what ideas can we do? Maybe we can do this. Maybe we can do this. My Uncle Fred in his organization did this. Let's try that. And the difficulty with that is you waste and expend a lot of energy on solutions that are not grounded in any planned journey of change. Then lots of effort goes in and you don't move forward, and then some people say, well, all that EDI stuff, that doesn't really work, does it? It was never going to work because you just took that throw mud at a wall approach to taking change forward. And I think the biggest intangible change, sort of obstacle, as well as on top of not really thinking through the psychological safety aspects and how you're going to ensure that psychological safety. I think another thing is that people think that the work is instant. You pull a lever, ta-da, there's the change. It doesn't work that way. And often when we go into organizations, it's sometimes been, I would say for probably about 60-70% of our clients, it's been because there's been a problem. There's been an issue. And what's happened is there's been, therefore, because of whatever issues those organizations have faced, an erosion of trust. Even when there hasn't been an issue, if the organisation has not leaned into the issues around equity, diversity and inclusion, and we know that younger staff members in particular have much higher expectations of how their organisations will work, there's loads of data around this, then you think, oh, well, I'll just do that action, pull a lever, and suddenly we will have rebuilt that trust. It doesn't work that way. And one of the things that we do at Full Colour, there are two models that we've created to work with clients around that, which show what the journey of trust involves in terms of the different stages to get from distrust to trust, but also the various component parts that when you add them together make up trust around topics to do with equality, diversity and inclusion. So I could probably spend 2 hours just talking about the obstacles and the things that people put in their own ways to progress, but I'll pause there. Hopefully that's enough.
Really interesting. So when you talked about the definition, so you've mentioned that I think a couple of times during this conversation, and I can totally relate to that. How do you gain that common understanding of definitions? Because like you say, people come at it from very different ways and the words are very similar but also very different at the same time. And when you're dealing with people from different backgrounds, nationalities, generations, it can be quite difficult to pull a common understanding together. So how do you go about that?
There's a long way and there's a quick way. So the quick way is go onto the Full Colour website, download our key terms, it's all free, and then you've got it there. And I think that I sort of jest, but I often use our terms as a start of the 10 to have conversations with people so that people really understand what the words mean. Very quickly, our definition of equity is about recognising that different groups of people face different barriers and therefore may require different levels of support or intervention in order to reach the same end as somebody who's not faced those barriers. So that's for us equity. Equality for us is about evening out how power works. We talked a little bit about that before. Diversity isn't just about looking around the room and seeing that there are different kinds of faces. That's one aspect of diversity, but it's to enable an organisation to be that diversity. If you look like me, in case you're not sure, I'm brown and I'm female. We are phenomenally good. Those people who have any form of difference are past masters at assimilation. So what we are very, very good at doing is hiding as far as possible. I can't hide the fact that I have brown skin, but hiding the things that make us different. If you're a genuinely diverse organisation, you don't have to assimilate. You can literally be the person you are. And the advantage of that to the organisation, on top of the fact that it's just easier if you happen to be from a minority group, is that what you're bringing into the organisation is genuine diversity of thinking. And what a lot of people, when you particularly at board levels, I've come across, they say, you know, well, we're not really interested in things like that. We just want diverse thinking. Oh, what do you mean by diverse thinking? Well, we've got it at the moment. We've got a social worker, we've got a university professor, we've got a doctor. I'm thinking seriously, how much diversity is there in a group of people where everybody's had higher education, been from a middle class background, had a middle class life, has a roof over their head and always had? How much diversity of thought do you really think you have there? So that's the short answer is go on the website and use our definitions. The long answer is the work that we often do with organisations is helping them come up with mission specific, as in to their mission specific, their context specific definitions of what those terms mean to their organisations. And often we will do like enormous projects. So we did a project with a major, enormous environmental climate justice charity, which involved literally working with all of their staff group in different ways to come up with a consensus about what those terms meant to those organisations. And it could be as simple as working with a small working group and getting them to do it. But the important aspect of it is that those definitions have to go beyond theory. So the way we work at Full Colour is we'll say, okay, well, at a top line, this is what the words mean to you, but then break it down and say, well, therefore, in practice, for leaders, this means blah, 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 2 or 3 sets of core behaviours. For board members, it means blah, blah, blah. For volunteers, it means blah, blah, blah. Because you have to be able to translate those top-level definitions into what it means for the day-to-day, how people show up in their jobs. So that's our approach.
Yeah, and with all of that, thinking about definitions and doing it across the organization with different types of people, I think one thing that we struggle with a little bit is tokenism, and making sure that we're not just bringing in somebody who's different in one particular way, because we might be checking that box again, and making sure that whoever we bring in or whatever way we do something or whoever we speak to, it's genuine and it's genuine and authentic. I think that's really important.
And the fact that you're thinking about it means that you're probably doing it a lot better than you're giving yourself credit for. I think for a lot of organisations, they're still at the how do we look diverse stage rather than how do we be diverse. So I think it's great that you're thinking that through.
Trying to change organisational culture can seem overwhelming. I think we should all the talking about. So what do you recommend for those who don't know where to start, aside from looking at your amazing website, which I would say is a very good starting place, but where next?
Do you know, it's really interesting because, as you would imagine, we work a lot on culture with organisations. But the thing that I find really fascinating is when you ask people, what do you mean by culture? They kind of don't know. Or the pictures in their heads about what culture actually is are very different from person to person. So I would say step one is understand what culture is. We tend to use, there's a model by Johnson and Scholes, which is called the culture web. And that sort of sets out 6 component parts, which when you add it together, creates the culture of an organisation. And those headings we find really useful for really breaking down what culture is and then prioritising what of those 6 elements of culture from the Johnson and Scholes model for your organisation would be the areas to focus that would drive the most change in your context. So we're literally doing that as we speak with one of our clients at the moment. They're a major museum based in London. And we started by training them on what culture is and then worked with them to say, well, okay, which of these 6 areas do you need to create shifts in? And they identified 3, and that's then forming the basis of developing the next stages. The next stages are then about saying, what is the culture we want to be? So in other words, it's defining the end state. After we've done lots and lots of work, what is that end state that we will look like? What will we look like? What will we feel like? What will we sound like? And really articulating that change. So you're not saying we will do this. You're saying by a specified point in time, by 2027, this is what our organisation will look and feel like. And then once you've done that, then you can start thinking, okay, well, given those elements of the Johnson and Scholes model that we've chosen, given that endpoint we want to reach, how much resource have we got? And by resource, I don't mean resource to spend on organisations like ours. I mean, how much time have you got in your organisation? How much thinking space have you got? What skills do you have that you can harness? And they may not be in the obvious places. Maybe you have an HR team, maybe you don't, but maybe there's someone because of a past job has got certain experience that you can bring in, even though it's not their role. So what skills and knowledge do you have? And then really think through what practical actions can we take? How can we make clear what expectations we have of each other in terms of the behaviours that will make up that end state culture description that we've come up with. And one of the things I find particularly interesting around equity, diversity and inclusion stuff is often those people who are the most engaged and most passionate about wanting change. When you ask them to talk about this, they will use they statements. They need to do this, they need to do that, they should think about this. And actually what needs to happen is, what am I going to do to contribute to that change? And that can only happen if you've defined what that change looks like and you've made clear what that means in terms of behaviours, and you've then put in place ways of supporting that. That could be coaching, that could be training, that could be whatever, ever kind of learning and development, but also measuring whether or not people are living up to those behaviours. And that can be through your appraisal systems. I'm a big fan of 360 feedback. I know a lot of people resist it. I don't know why. It's actually, if it's done properly, it's one of the most valuable things you can do as a human. You learn so much. So you need to, as I say, looping right back to the beginning, you've got to make it practical. You've got to make it practical. You've got to move from the theoretical and make it practical. And the final thing I would say about all of this, whether we're talking about culture change, whether we're talking about any other aspect of ED&I, whether it's decolonizing your work or whatever it is that you're talking about, be realistic. Because one of the biggest things, it goes back to the stumbling block question that you asked me earlier, one of the biggest things we see is people's ambition is like this big. It's ginormous. You can't get your arms around it. And often that ambition is described in really motherhood and apple pie terms, which no organisation are ever going to achieve. So there's something about being really, really precise about exactly what will have changed as a result of this work, but also then making sure that that articulation of what will have changed for you is matched by the resources that you're putting behind it, whether it is that your own resources in terms of time and effort, whether it's external support you're bringing in. And one of the things we always say to people, do you know what, if you've got £2.50 to spend on this, that's absolutely fine. That is not a problem. Just make sure that the goals and ambitions that you set for yourself are deliverable on £2.50, because it's much, much better to do less and do it brilliantly than to try and overstretch yourself, do it badly, because you'll lose confidence, you'll lose a sense of what's possible, you'll lose momentum, you'll create distrust. It's really not worth it. Big believer in under-promising and over-delivering, because that is the way to create long-term, sustainable motivation for this work.
Great, really interesting. And what you're describing there is good project design and good project management. And when you think of it within the international development sector, I'm just thinking, well, yeah, there's your impact statement and there's your monitoring evaluation framework, and it's all there. It's just making sure that, like you say, that you have that end goal that you're aiming for, and you step by step figure out the processes you need. And yeah, great. That's it. Thank you so much, Srabani. I've really enjoyed talking to you, and I've learned a lot today. And learned a lot that I can immediately think through that will impact Link Education and maybe the Alliance as well. So really, thank you so much.
Absolute pleasure. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and good luck to everyone who's on this journey. And my final parting shot is have fun doing it. This is joyous work. It should be fun. If it's feeling painful, you're not doing it right.
Great. Excellent point to end on, I think. Have fun.
Thank you.
Thank you, Srabani.